All right, people, welcome to our first episode of Real Conversations. I'm Daigo, and this is Fred.
Hello there.
So here we're in our first episode. We're here to talk and review Interstellar.
What are you going to do with it?
I'm gonna give it something socially responsible to do.
Can't we just let it go?
This thing needs to learn how to adapt, Murph.
Gang, let's mask up.
Like the rest of us. This world's a treasure. It's been telling us to leave for a while now.
Your daughter's generation will be the last to survive on Earth. You're the best pilot we ever had. Get out there and save the world.
Everybody ready to say goodbye to our solar system? To our galaxy. Here we go. We're here. We want to get down fast, don't we?
Actually, we want to get there in one piece.
Hang on. We have a mission. Our mission does not work if the people on Earth are dead by the time we pull it off.
Well, we got this far, farther than any human in history.
Oh, not far enough.
Make it count.
Where's the mountains?
Those aren't mountains. They're waves.
I'm not gonna make it!
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
You might have to decide between seeing your children again
And the future of the human race.
We'll find a way. But we always have.
I guess you have a few informations about the box office.
Well, yeah, I certainly like crunching numbers on movies, so I was quite eager to see how this movie would measure up with Nolan's past efforts. So, Christopher Nolan's Interstellar was released November 5th to an estimated $47.5 million. Yeah, so this was roughly $15.3 million less than Nolan's last original concept release, which was Inception. And that opened to $62 million and went on to gross $292 domestically and over $800 million worldwide.
Whoa.
So while these numbers are somewhat subpar considering the following that Nolan has developed to date, the movie seems to be holding quite well. In its second week of release, Interstellar amassed a $28.3 million opening, or total, and that was off about 40.4% from the first weekend drop. So if you compare this to Nolan's Inception, it had a second week drop of only 32%, and it never declined more than 39% from weekend to weekend until about 2 months in its release, and that's why that ultimately ended up grossing so much. And so in this respect, Interstellar falls behind. In addition, with this weekend, with the new Hunger Games coming out, probably going to eclipse it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Do you think that was the fact of only the competition that it had?
Yeah, and this wasn't the first time where a live-action film and an animated feature have showed off in the box office. There was Madagascar Escape to Africa went up against Prometheus, which was another science fiction themed movie, and that one won. And Wall-E went up against Wanted, and Wall-E eventually won. So it seems to be this trend of animated features outdoing and outcompeting live action films. And to me, it kind of makes sense because it has a broader audience. The family appeal.
Do you think that it was the science of it was a bit hard to absorb for the general audience?
It could have been. I mean, some people might have treated this movie as a taxing homework assignment, you know, to see the legitimacy of, you know, whether this movie depicts space travel and time and space dilation accurately. But in a general market, I would assume that Big Hero 6 would have more general appeal. But on the plus side, Interstellar to date has roughly grossed over $225 million overseas, and $41.7 million of that is coming from China. So ultimately, this movie should gross over $400 million overseas if it follows the trends similar to what other Nolan movies have done.
That's great, yeah.
So while domestically it seems to be on track for roughly $170 million, and this is on a budget of $165 million. It seems less than stellar, but it should make up for it overseas though. So ultimately, this will be another success on Nolan's hands.
Moving aside from the numbers, how are the reviews going?
Right now, the reviews, they seem to be mixed to positive.
All right.
So it depends on the site that you use. For Rotten Tomatoes, top critics seem to be settled around 7 out of 10, 7.1, I think it seems. But if you look at the audience rating, it's 4.2 out of 5. So it seems that the general public, even though the source material may be somewhat difficult to grasp or understand, they seem to be liking the movie more than actual critics have.
Yeah.
And IMDb actually gave it a 9 out of 10.
I saw that, yes.
And that has amassed over 200,000 votes, and they've already placed it in top of its 250 movies of all time. So.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yes.
I did not know that.
It always seems to be a divide with Nolan fans, you know, whether people think he's too pretentious and overrated, or whether the people that don't like his movies are just not understanding what they're all about. It seems to be that divide, I find. The
reviews or opinions that I've encountered have always been positive, though. Like, it was always about, let's say, someone saying, oh, don't listen to the naysayers, and this movie was great, it was amazing, and they would cite why. But that's the thing, like, I haven't stumbled upon the people that didn't like the movie. So have you crossed about with that, by the way? Like, do you know where would it come, the negative side?
It seems that, for the negative reviews that I've read, it seems that people definitely praise the technical aspects of the film and how it's shot, and, you know, just, there's no denying that this is a beautifully shot and filmed movie. Yes. But they feel that sometimes its intellectual grasp is a bit too ambitious. Sometimes it doesn't fully back it up. That's what they appear to be saying, and I guess this specifically refers to the ending scene, where he ultimately ends up behind Merv's bookcase. They take this as like it was love that guided him back to Merv to send the message.
Yes.
But that's not how I viewed it.
I did actually stumble upon interesting critique, and I think the comment about that scene of the bookcase, and also, well, the whole idea of himself sending the message, it was too much of a cliche. Like, if you're already experienced with different sci-fi movies or TV series or whatever, you almost kind of guess that, and then when you see that, you sort of like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I don't mind cliches. So that's why, but I can understand that point of view. Yeah.
Yes. See, it was different for me personally because I didn't quite take it as it was love that guided him back to that bookcase.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was more so us from the future bringing Cooper back to where he needed to be in order for Merv to solve the equation
and save humanity, basically.
Yeah.
Make it. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
My interpretation of the movie also presents a paradox. Before or after the Lazarus missions, where they were sent off to the planets, there's a plan A and there's a plan B.
Yes.
And so, as we know, plan A was go on the missions and to find a habitable planet and send a message back to Earth and get back there before everyone starves to death.
Yes.
And then with the information that they find going through the wormhole, they'd be able to solve the equation for gravity.
Yeah.
And so then that would be able to allow them to take the space station that they were building and to put it into orbit, take off.
Yeah.
And plan B was...
they had the stored eggs, remember? The fertilized eggs of humanity, and basically you just artificially breed them, and then you build a colony out of it.
As we know, plan A was never meant to happen. He already had solved it, and he could not solve for gravity. But from my understanding was that they who brought the wormhole was actually us from the future putting the wormhole there.
Right. And so it's basically like a chicken and the egg problem, you mean?
We made the wormhole in order for us to go through it from the future so that we could save humanity.
Yes.
How did we go through the wormhole in the first place? How was it placed there? And I view that as almost a paradox.
It is. It is definitely. It is definitely. And it's something that you can wrap your brain and think hours about it.
Exactly, and who knows, Nolan might have
idea
or concept in his head that, this all makes sense, but
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Unbeknownst to us, so we are left to wonder. I guess.
Yeah, we should give him a call.
Yeah.
Instead of like, hey, Chris. So we're curious about this one thing.
I was trying to explore some reasons for why this movie, at least statistically and number-wise, might not have been as popular as his past efforts. And I try not to use the Dark Knight series because that's a pre-established brand.
Yes, that is true.
So original concepts seem to, it's from the ground up, something that people haven't seen or experienced before. So you're taking more of a gamble with that. And Inception happened to be a success. Mm-hmm. With this one, I tried to come up with a few things. One of them, this is a weak argument, but the running time. So the movie is almost 3 hours long.
Yeah.
But if you look at The Dark Knight, that has a running time of over 2.5 hours. If you look at The Dark Knight Rises, that also has a running time of over 2.5 hours. So I don't think one could look to that for a criticism of how this movie hasn't done as successful.
Yeah, that's true.
The other thing was the presence of action. So Inception trailers were loaded with action.
Yes.
The Dark Knight series were loaded with action. This movie didn't quite so much emphasize action sequences so much as the mystery of space and time and the human qualities of love and other emotions such as that. So,
for instance, Nolan himself mentioned that his inspiration to the movie, or at least for making the movie, was an homage to, let's say, 2001: A Space Odyssey and also The Right Stuff. So in that sense, do you think it was a very good and effective science fiction movie?
It's definitely more of a relevant sci-fi movie.
All right.
As in, with the recent decrease in funding for NASA, it seems very much to draw a parallel to how we've become more concerned with so much trying to deal with our problems on Earth that we've kind of forgotten our ambition to, discover other planets and other galaxies. And in that sense, I agree with what he was saying about what it means to be human, the strive to discover the unknown and how that's kind of become lost on us recently. But I also respect, too, the homages, as you have said, to the earlier science fiction movies, especially 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, there's so many things littered throughout that movie that I can see were inspired by that movie and many others, including Blade Runner and Aliens. Everything from the set design to even little tidbits that he's put in there. For example, the placing of the wormhole next to Saturn.
Yeah.
This was originally what Stanley Kubrick wanted to do for the monolith.
Oh, right, instead of Jupiter.
Yes, but at the time they didn't have the computer technology to make the rings around Saturn. And so apparently that's why he placed the wormhole around there as a little homage to that.
I did not know that. That's super cool.
And another one that I was thinking of actually was the robots, the tires.
Yeah, I certainly thought of that, yeah.
They actually look like the monoliths.
Also, even at the beginning, when you have this retrospective documentary segments, you see all these screens that they have this monolithic.
And the whole concept of how the monoliths in 2001 were sort of sent there to advance society on Earth. That was kind of my interpretation of it, how they were presented in front of the Neanderthals and the apes, and it showed them evolve through time. So it's almost like the screens were showing interviews with people who were like the pioneers.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Like bring them the future. It's very weird to explain, but it certainly draws an homage, definitely, to 2001. The set designs. I noticed that he specifically referenced Alien, and that was one of the very first movies that I watched before 2001 or any other previous science fiction movies, where the set pieces were actually made.
Yeah.
And it was just camera tricks and camera angles to make it seem in context with the space around it, and to provide an actual feeling that this spaceship was tangible in this wide expanse.
Definitely.
And that's, yeah.
And I can see actually, what I know of the pre-production, at least from my side, was the fact that this, in the story of Interstellar, is based on an earlier script that Jonathan Nolan wrote in 2007, but didn't touch it for, about almost 7 years. And then
it was actually Steven Spielberg.
Are you serious?
Who was supposed to be attached to the project in 2007, but eventually he ended up pursuing other ideas. And so when Jonathan brought the script to Nolan, they ended up changing a few things. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that Anne Hathaway's character was originally meant to be a male.
Okay.
And what had actually happened is that the Chinese had actually sent an expedition of, I think it was 5 astronauts and 12 robots. And they went through the wormhole, but the wormhole was actually much smaller, still spherical shape, but much smaller. And so the crew suffered distortion when they went through it.
Oh, wow.
And when the Chinese astronauts and their robots got to the other side, they had only went to one planet. And when Cooper and fellow astronauts went through to meet up with them, they found that there was alien species and these robots were turning against them. So it was a much more... It seemed a much more fantastical version of the script.
Sort of like a bit more action-packed and dangers and stuff like that.
Exactly. It's things that you could expect from a Spielbergian type movie.
Yes, definitely.
And while I appreciate Steven Spielberg's movies, I'm glad that Nolan took the reins.
Yeah.
Because it's more of a personal story now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That story seemed to focus more so on, like you said, more action elements, more, introducing alien species and introducing killer robots, and, it's...
Don't go there.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that he didn't go there, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And it seemed like that earlier script didn't really have much of a human aspect to it as it does now. And that's why I think, while I have a lot of respect for Jonathan Nolan, I mean, he's co-written with Christopher on several of their movies.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, co-written with Christopher Nolan. So I think the two of them together provide a really good team. Christopher Nolan had the special effects for going through the wormhole and going through the black hole. All of these effects were done beforehand, and they were actually projected on a screen outside of their set pieces, so that when they were in the spaceships, they were looking out at these beautiful imagery, just to get the feeling of... I know. Your time and place.
That's the thing. Oh, and the detail about Iceland as well, for the outdoor shots where they were in... it's in a planet where there was water planet. It's not...
Oh, right. Yes.
So what that was also shot in Iceland, but the fact was that they had dry suits underneath the spacesuits.
Okay.
But the issue was her dry suit was open like half an inch or something.
Oh.
And she started having these symptoms of frostbite on her feet. And they started shooting, and she was feeling a bit, a bit strange, and things were hurting. And then she goes to one of the production people, and she's like, "So, what are the symptoms of frostbite?" And they tell her, and the production guy goes like, "But why do you ask?" And then she tells them, and then okay, let's speed this up and let's keep this going. But yeah, it's nowadays everyone is using blue screens and green screens and whatnot, right? And visual effects, and you have to interact with empty space as an actor.
Yeah.
But in this case was, like you said, I mean, if you even see the YouTube documentaries or behind the scenes footage that we have access, everyone has access to, you can see that while they're shooting, you can see through the window, there's no blue screen. You see the darkness of space and maybe Gargantua, the black hole, or the wormhole itself outside and the screen. And it's something interesting. And I was watching one of the interviews with the actors as well, and how they were talking about it, the fact that in the scenes where the ship would bank right, and all of your body would go to the left because of the inertia, it was actually happening.
Yes.
But they would feel the effect of gravity or inertia, and you can't top that. I mean, that's real.
Well, you're putting the actors in an immersive experience, and that's going to show through their performance, I feel. And that's why I found, like, with Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway and all the other actors in the film, it's just, you can see, like, you can believe that they're going through these amazing and fantastical events, and I think that allows you to get more into the movie as it goes on. Absolutely.
Definitely. And one other thing about practicality of production or the realness of it, all the robots, Kip and Case, I think it was the name of the other robot.
Yes.
The people that were voicing them were actually on set, and they were actually the puppeteers for each of them, right?
They were actually. The voice of Bill Irwin, actually.
Oh, right.
It gives the voice, and he was on set, and it's almost like we're using the most cutting-edge technology for this movie, yet we're also going back to basics, using real set pieces.
Definitely.
And it's just, I find that that does so much more for a movie for myself than what most computer-generated effects could do.
Let's talk about Kip Thorne.
Kip Thorne?
Yeah, and his involvement in the movie, so what do you know about that?
One of the most interesting things that I found was that Kip Thorne actually supervised the special effects by writing actual theoretical equations based on wormholes and black holes, and he used these equations to put it into a computer-generated model with his team at a company called Double Negative. And they used these special effects to generate computer-generated images of these black holes and these wormholes, and these were things that Kip himself hasn't even been able to visualize. And so with this information, he's actually been able to create papers for theoretical physicists as well as computer scientists.
So you're telling me that this movie actually helped science in overall?
In a way, it did, yes.
Oh my God.
I mean, I guess, I don't know how we haven't thought of this before, using the equations and plugging them into a computer model. I mean, it's I guess it just takes a special project to come along and, push these ideas forward. But that I found that very interesting, and that almost made me a bit more excited at what we had seen in the black hole and the wormhole. Is just, if these are actually legitimate interpretations of what we believe these things to exist as, then that's extremely exciting.
And Kip Thorne was one of the producers even in the movie, right? He turned out to be one of the producers, right?
He was one of the producers, and apparently in early pre-production, he had 2 guidelines to strictly follow, that nothing would violate established physical laws. Oh. And that all wild speculations would spring from science and not from the creative mind of the screenwriters.
Oh my God! Wow.
So that's still, like, that almost grounds it a bit more into, I don't want to say reality because these are theoretical concepts, but things that are able to be grasped or tangible, that aren't far-fetched.
Yeah.
These things are actually being studied. So that was...
I know that he being on set, like especially in the scenes where it takes place on Earth and you're following the storyline of either adult Murph and Michael Caine and how things are going, like when you see on the blackboards the equations, I mean, those were written by Kip Thorne themselves, and obviously it was the job of the actors to sort of like sell the idea that they knew what they were writing or they knew what they were reading.
I'm very appreciative that Nolan has made this effort to make this as scientifically relevant as possible. It's good. It's refreshing to see a movie like this come along, where a movie company is willing to put this much trust and faith in a director to give them creative control and to use these advanced scientific concepts and to put it into a big budget film.
Oh yeah.
In a market that's saturated with remakes and sequels and prequels and subdivided end movies, it's good to see these original movies coming out from a director that people appear to have confidence in, and he has confidence in himself.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
There is actually one note that one little other tidbit here that I have. In Murph's books on the bookshelf, there is a clear visual cue that points to Stephen King's novel The Stand.
What?
And this book is about the near extinction of humanity and survivors struggling to relocate and settle down as the devil is taking over the world.
Are you serious?
And while that's not one of my favorite stories or movies, it's interesting to see these tiny little homages to so many facets of pop culture that have come before this movie that are related to this movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In obvious or subtle ways. I mean...
Oh, yeah, that's great. Look at that. I wonder... I definitely wouldn't have picked... Well, obviously something very hidden on the scenes, right? You wouldn't easily pick up, but that's interesting. I wonder what kind of other Easter eggs are in the movie.
Yeah, and that almost seems to be another trait that seems to have been taken from Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick has been known to plant little Easter eggs in these movies and hidden subliminal messages and stuff. So I think, throwbacks and shout-outs, and it's great. It's great to see that he respects his source material.
Talk about Christopher Nolan's directing. I've seen the interviews from the actors in conference panels or interviews with individually with some of the cast members. It gives Nolan credit in terms of how the actors respond or comment about his directing, and that he doesn't push the actors. One of the scenes for Jessica Chastain's character, just venture to guess that it's one of the scenes where she's figuring out who the ghost is. Christopher Nolan said, this is her Zen, go. And only that line, she understood, okay, what she had to bring to the scene and whatnot. And
well, I think, too, that just shows the faith that Nolan has in these actors. Yeah. And I guess how carefully he is at casting the people he eventually chooses for his movies. And I especially like the casting of Matthew McConaughey. And how recently he's kind of shifted his career towards more serious film-goer movies. And I believe it was the 2012 movie Mud.
Yes.
That Nolan actually chose Matthew McConaughey for the movie, based on his performance in that. And then after Mud came Dallas Buyers Club and the recently successful True Detective TV show. And so I think he's done a fantastic job in this movie and his other movies, in terms of who he's cast and what he's allowed his actors to do. And as you say, if he gives them freedom, I think in part that's trust.
Yeah.
But having that sort of confidence in your actors probably gives the actors the confidence to go all out and truly explore their character and present what they feel. No, especially I can remember the scene where Matthew McConaughey, when they get back from the second planet, or no, the first planet.
Oh, the water planet?
The water planet, yeah. And 23 years have passed.
Oh,
and
yes.
He's watching the collection of videos from his family, and
yes,
I just wonder what Nolan had to say in order for him to enact a response like that out of McConaughey. I mean, that scene, you're there with him, you're feeling what he's feeling.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Literally
definitely.
a life passing him by.
Yes.
And so it's amazing.
Oh, and actually, one thing that I don't know how blatantly we sort of didn't comment about this, talking about production in the movie and homages to previous movies. The fact that he did not use sound for the space shots, right?
Yes.
And that's something that I can't think of another movie other than 2001, at least on my mind at the moment, that hasn't beautifully done that. And he did it brilliantly.
Even when spaceship explodes, when Dr. Mann tries to open the airlock, it shows you hear the explosion within the ship, but then it cuts immediately to Anne Hathaway and Matthew McConaughey looking at it, and the explosion goes silent.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's a very cool dynamic. I think he put a lot of emphasis on the sound production in this film.
I did too. And actually, there were a few, and this is not the first time, obviously, at least that I hear from a Christopher Nolan movie. There were a few people that actually made a few negative comments to the sound.
Really?
Yeah. The thing that happened was there were a few comments where people would say that the soundtrack itself would be too strong and would actually go over the dialogue of many characters or many scenes within the Interstellar movie. And they were arguing about it, and actually Christopher Nolan made a comment again and saying, no, the movie sounds how he intended it to. So there's one of the things as well that he pays attention to sound, and I don't know if it's almost to a fault, but it's certainly almost to a fault according to a few people.
So they felt that the characters suffered in terms of their development and succumbed to the actual atmosphere and the sound of the movie at points?
Yeah, definitely, depending on what scene and what dialogue, if it was a dramatic scene, but there was maybe a particular soundtrack or a special effect sound that was going over the dialogue in certain parts, and they would be like, oh, what did he or she say?
Maybe somewhat, I don't want to say agree, but I could see that opinion that people have if the soundtrack wasn't what it was.
Yes.
But given that this soundtrack is what it is, I couldn't see it any other way. What Hans Zimmer has done with this soundtrack, the use of organs especially,
indeed, yeah,
it just, the movie is incomplete without it.
Oh yes, definitely.
And how it builds up, I mean, especially in the scene where Cooper's trying to reattach the spaceship to the Endurance, and it's spinning into the gravity of man's planet.
I mean, what was your first impression? Because I had my impression as well when the first, notes of that music came in, even in the start of the movie.
I was going to say the same thing.
Like, what impression did it remind you of a particular movie, or?
It just gave me a sense of I knew what was coming. When Cooper gets up from his, sweat-stained dream, and he looks out onto his cornfield at the crack of dawn, and that organ just heats up as he's looking out, and it just cuts off. And
I know.
It just grabs you instantaneously, and it's,
I have to say, when I was, at least for me, when I saw that scene, I was listening to the music, and because it almost seems that first track set up an introduction of what the whole score was going to be. And when I listened to that section, it actually snapped me back into actually 2001. For me, it was alluding to, that awness that 2001 had, but musically. So I have to say, it made him, it's a unique soundtrack, but also that pays homage to a few ideas and notions of what a science fiction soundtrack is, actually.
Absolutely. For me, at least, it managed to get me more excited about the material. And, it just helps to create the atmosphere, and it's phenomenal. That's I don't know how else I could speculate on that soundtrack except to say that you have to experience it yourself.
Oh, yes, definitely. And one of the things as well that we can talk about is just the fact of how the score was made, Nolan, it's not the first time that he worked with Hans, but I know that he said it himself in a press conference that every time he works with Hans, whenever he meets with him before a movie, he has an idea of like, oh, let's do this, or let's do this something new. But in this movie in particular, there was something really peculiar about how he did it.
Apparently, Christopher Nolan didn't provide a one-page plot synopsis of what this movie's about or what's going to happen in this movie. He more so gave a synopsis of Zimmer's own story in his own life.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know the details of what was written down, but I guess Hans Zimmer's trials and tribulations of his own life and how he came to be where he was today. So in a sense, his human journey.
Yeah.
And so it fits perfectly into the journey of this movie and what it means to be human and the conflicts that we must overcome in our own lives. And so, in an odd way, it worked out very well.
I know, and he did such a brilliant job. And obviously, there's a lot of movie composers, and some people, or to many people even, Hans Zimmer might not be the favorite composer. There's one of those things that, if you know a composer really well, you always listen, for instance, the soundtrack of a particular movie, and you would go, oh, okay, that's James Horner, or that's Thomas Newman, or something like that. But I do love the times where Hans Zimmer almost creates something unique, and that certainly happened, at least for me, when I experienced Inception, for instance. Obviously, some people now even jokingly talk about that sound,
that deepening horn.
Yeah, that deepening horn that everyone's like, "Duh."
Yeah,
and everyone's like, "Oh, that was so annoying," and some people didn't like it. I certainly loved it, but it also, the soundtrack in itself that was around that deep horn, it made it gave the soundtrack such an interesting, very uniqueness.
Yes.
And certainly this movie has that, I think. What you thought about the movie?
Overall, in contradiction to the fact that this has been surprisingly one of the lowest rated Nolan films, which I found very upsetting because obviously I loved the movie.
Yeah.
I thought it was great, and the themes, in terms of the themes, I mean, I think everybody got the sense of what it means to be human, what it means for us to discover things that we don't know about, the mystery of the unknown, but also the theme of love, and the people that you love literally can transcend time, can transcend space. I mean, we love people that are no longer with us.
Yes.
And so whether they're in another dimension, whether they're whatever your beliefs or how you view the afterlife, love can transcend that. And I think that he definitely touched on that theme in this movie. And I think he done an effective job with it. I think some people felt that it was a bit overkill, and that they thought that love was driving the whole movie. But I think that's a personal interpretation of how you view the movie and what it's ultimately about. And so I kind of took it with the human aspect and what love means, but I also viewed it as much as it was about that as it was about the science.
Yes. Yeah.
And discovering new and exciting things that we have never dreamed or could think possible. And so I think it's a great movie. I think it's well acted. I think the screenplay is good. And most of all, I think it's a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I have to agree with you as well. Well, obviously, I have to state for the listeners as well that I'm a huge Nolan fan, but I'm always cautious before watching a movie, and certainly this movie, it's not that even fulfilled my expectations. It, in an odd way, it didn't, but in a good way, it didn't actually, just because it was such a unique experience, and I do love the themes that Nolan touches in the movie. Like you said, last but not least, I guess, but it's all the other things that happen during the movie. All of his movies, it seems to be built in layers, because although there is that overall subject of love and transcendence of time and space, there's also the subject of how we treat each other and loneliness and hope. Okay, in my scale of, let's say, 1 to 10, I would give this movie an 8.5, maybe a 9. I would give it, yeah. But a solid 8.5 for sure.
I'd give it 4.5 reels out of 5.
All right, that's our new rating system. All right,
there
let's
we
do
go.
that. Well, anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and please hopefully join us for our next episode. Will be aired shortly, and so that's goodbye for me,
and goodbye for me as well. Hopefully we've fueled your desire to start a conversation with your friends about the movie. And
I hope so too. I hope so
to come.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, have a good one.
Have a good one.